Now, we know that the minister was misleading the smaller parties who then supported the fiscal framework with a VAT increase. He was misleading them into believing that he was still going to change the VAT increase because that is what he said in his court papers.
The DA has led a very unrelenting and offensive campaign against the African National Congress on the basis of a lie.
When in his own papers, the minister said he was going ahead, it was impossible to do anything else but have the VAT increase, and the smaller parties were never justified to believe that he would withdraw the VAT increase. And now suddenly he has a different tune.
But I was also expecting you to ask Helen what the minister's lawyers have written to them as an offer for an out-of-court settlement. But perfectly, I'm quite certain that the DA on his own, for his credibility on this matter, they should be at liberty to share with the public. How then are we going to be persuaded by a private conversation?
Have you spoken to your own minister and asked if this is really the case?
Which one? About
Minister of Finance, and say, are you asking for a out-of-court settlement with the DA?
We knew that the DA was going to react because this is naturally going to be embarrassing for them.
Yeah, but have you asked him? Have you said to him?
I'm coming to that point. So, personally, I sent that to Enoch. You know he's overseas. To say to him, now we are being told that there is another, this is a statement of the DA. And his response to me is that I don't know what is this about.
I mean, that's bizarre, Helen. Are you guys prepared?
Guys, I've just listened to a South African commentator who actually, when he was trying to analyze South Africa's politics, he said that the insanity that happens in South Africa's politics is driving him insane. I think I'm slowly getting there, because the more I really listen to these arguments in the ANC-DA back-to-back clashes, I'm slowly getting to the point where maybe you might categorize that as slowly going insane. So in this altercation here on this SABC, a program hosted by Clement Manyatela, the ANC, I think this is the rep for the parliament in Tuli, is actually trying to break down what's going to happen now after this victory, so to speak, that has actually been won by the DA in the court, to the point where we know, like you heard yesterday, Karabo Kakao, spokesperson of the DA, argues that the ANC lawyers, I think probably the lawyers representing the minister or the ANC anyway, actually asked the DA for an out-of-court settlement. All right, so that was settled. In fact, I'm going to be making a series of videos by the DA politicians, really trying to break down what really happened and all of that. Only last night, anyway, we now saw this altercation between the ANC's, I think this is representative of parliament, his name is Ntuli, and Helen Zille, actually going back and forth on, what really would be going on. The rate bill, there's an issue now with the rate bill, which is actually, what, if I'm hearing Ntuli correctly, he actually argues that now Minister Godongwana has to reconsider or probably reformulate what has been called a rate bill. And the rate bill is this policy instrument that actually outlines the sources from where the Minister of Finance will probably raise the revenue for the budget of a fiscal financial year. Now, he argues that, there has actually always been two options. Is either that the minister will go with the instruments that have actually been proposed, which include the VAT hike and some other basis for some other elements, or there will be a significant cut in expenditure, the exact proposition that the DA actually has been putting forth for many days now, that, South Africa doesn't have a debt problem, South Africa has an expenditure problem, all right? And so, it actually, we know that the ANC has actually found that route really difficult, and so those are the two options Minister Godongwana has to take now before probably stating clearly or a position for how South Africa will raise the budget to raise the funds to finance its budget for the fiscal year. However, at the point in this discussion, and you guys will be watching soon, Helen Zille and this Ntuli is the ANC rep in charge of this whole thing, I think at the level of the parliament, had a really interesting for me, really confusing as well altercation. First of all, I find it really, I find it really absurd that Minister Godongwana is abroad in this really critical time. All right, that the whole country is grappling with this whole problem with the court and all of that. The man is abroad. Okay, he actually takes me back to. Nigerians have been slamming their own President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for about some days now, arguing that he actually decided to work remotely. He was working from abroad for the last, I think, 1 week or so. Nigerians were really so. Minister Godongwana is actually reminding me, because I don't really know how it would be that he would be abroad in this really critical time. At least I would assume that there will have been some honor, at least for South Africans, since this is a debate that is really pertinent to the people of South Africa. At least honor the people by being in the country, even if the results of the court case would be a little bit somewhat embarrassing, but at least the honor for the people of South Africa. But Ntuli here argues that Minister Godongwana is abroad, and now he's actually slamming the DA for deceiving. He actually argues that the DA, what the DA has done, has been to lead an offensive attack against the ANC on the basis of a lie. And this lie is the fact that the ANC is trying to push the narrative that the ANC is selling out the poor, and that the ANC is also trying to pull in smaller parties to work in favor of what it wants to kind of like pass and all of that. And he argues that this is how the ANC is seeing what the DA is doing, that the DA is actually leading an offensive against the ANC on the basis of a lie. Now, Helen Zille goes out to slam him back. She doesn't lose. She always reminds me of Gaten Mackenzie. When you hit them, they hit you back. They don't really know how to waste time in hitting back. So Helen Zille then hits back, arguing that the ANC actually was being the one that had been deceiving, trying to mislead the public in South Africa, somewhat deceiving South Africa. Even one of the lawyers who actually led the case against Israel in the ICJ was the one who represented the EFF in fighting against this VAT bill 2 days ago. He actually argued that the process of passing the VAT bill, all right, the VAT thing, actually has some intricacies of deception, all right? So Helen Zille was building on that point that, the ANC is trying to mislead South Africa. It was trying to mislead the public, thinking that, in trying to sort of like let the people know that probably the VAT thing would be adjusted, but let's just pass it for now. That was what the ANC was doing, and that the ANC is actually pretending. The ANC doesn't want to assume the responsibility or the objective reality that it had been defeated in the courts. Rather, it doesn't want to allow the DA have the say of having that victory, but it wants to cave in to the arguments of the smaller parties. And it's on live TV, I couldn't believe that this kind of arguments could be going on, where even Clement Manyatela now had to ask, because at some point in the argument, the ANC rep was now arguing that, the DA has actually said that the ANC lawyers have actually called for an out-of-court settlement. But there's no proof. The ANC is actually asking now the DA, trying to put the DA in a corner, that there's no proof that this out-of-court settlement was asked by the lawyers. And Helen Zille actually is now trying to rebuff and clarify, although even Clement Manyatela was even asking, this is where the whole thing is actually going now. That Clement Manyatela was actually, as you saw, asking Helen Zille that what is the proof that the DA lawyers, that the ANC lawyers were actually asked for an out-of-court settlement for this whole thing. And the fact that one of the parts that actually blew my mind is that Ntuli then even argues that when Minister Godongwana was then asked, because he's abroad, right? He's actually abroad watching this whole thing, maybe from a TV or something. The Minister of Finance is abroad while this whole thing shaking South Africa is going on. He actually was asked, if he knew anything about the fact that the lawyers representing his department, so to speak, have actually asked for an out-of-court settlement to settle this whole thing with the VAT hike. Ntuli says Godongwana actually replied that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Bro, For me, that's the peak of this whole thing. Let's quickly listen to this altercation between Helen Zille and this ANC rep in Thule and share your thoughts, guys, in the comments.
Okay. Mdu, what is the status of the fiscal framework that was adopted? Does the minister have to now present a new fiscal framework? Because in his statement, he talks about the division of revenue bill and that other third bill. But what about the fiscal framework?
You see, Clement, what the minister has not dealt with in detail on his statement, and I understand why, is that given the submission, this statement is saying, having received various submissions, including from political parties, as per the decision that was taken by Parliament, I want to add, I have therefore reconsidered the application of the VAT for this fiscal framework or budget that he presented in Parliament. What he has not explained in detail, and I'm saying I understand why, because that requires him to do an internal exercise in the National Treasury, is which of the options presented to him is he going to be exploiting to offset the VAT. In his statement, he talks about the 70 billion over a medium term. But the options that are presented to him, including by the African National Congress, he has not dealt with how, in public at least, is he intending to offset the VAT using any or all of the options that are currently at his disposal. So that is an exercise that the minister has got to undertake internally in the Treasury and come back and present to Parliament or to the nation. And this is how now he intends taking the budget forward. Okay, so here's the challenge now, Mdu, because you indicated as the African National Congress earlier today that what the minister has announced now is the culmination of the discussions that he's had with other smaller parties and interfacing with the proposals they were making. But isn't it weird that the same minister who comes from the ANC last week makes public statements about how it's just simply too late to stop the VAT bus? Last week and this week stresses us in court papers that it was never our intention to change the VAT hike. And yet you want to claim now as the ANC that this is a minister who took seriously the proposals that were made by the other smaller parties. The minister issued a statement, Clement. It's not our claim, it's in his statement, that part of the reasons that have influenced his own position on this matter, a reconsideration of his earlier position, including what was ventilated in court, are submissions made by various players, including political parties. That is written down in his statement. The second point I want to make is that if the minister was involved, I can't speak on his behalf, but let's assume that he was involved or he is involved with the Democratic Alliance on another process through which they want to have an out-of-court settlement. Why does that not appear in his statement as part of his consideration? That I'm dealing with this matter not only because of the submissions you have made, but also because in the interaction that is taking place between my department and in relation to the case that is in court, we believe that we have a way in which we can find this out. Even if it doesn't specify the details, just to indicate to the public, take the public into confidence. Do you not trust the DA when they say they've been speaking to Treasury's lawyers? We were not part of that private conversation. Obviously, those discussions, Clement, are not just like me and you like this. They've got to be written down. We will only believe what the DA is presenting on this matter when the document has been made public. And let me tell you why would have a difficult to believe just the word of Madam Zille on this matter. The DA has led a very unrelenting and offensive campaign against the African National Congress on the basis of a lie. That one, the ANC is misleading the small parties that an intervention is possible within the parameters of the law for the VAT to be reversed before the 1st of May. And secondly, that the ANC is selling out the poor. That's the campaign that Helen and his party... Let's hear from Helen. Helen, I mean, the suggestion here is that you guys are probably not telling us the truth. How do you respond to what Mdu is saying that, well, is it even true that you guys are talking to Treasury's lawyers and that they are indeed considering an out-of-court settlement with the Democratic Alliance? Are you lying to us?
Treasury's lawyers approached our lawyers yesterday evening, and then our lawyers contacted me. And they said Treasury's lawyers, or the minister's lawyers, have proposed an out-of-court settlement, and these are the terms. And we agreed that we would respond with a counter-offer requiring that they tender our costs and that we continue with Part B of the application. So that's simply a fact. Now, we know that the minister was misleading the smaller parties who then supported the fiscal framework with a VAT increase. He was misleading them into believing that he was still going to change the VAT increase because that is what he said in his court papers. In the papers that he delivered in reply to our papers last Thursday and that his lawyers answered in court on Tuesday this week, he said there was never any intention of withdrawing the VAT increase and that, in fact, it couldn't be withdrawn. That is what he said. After his showing on Tuesday, through his lawyers in the court, he suddenly had a change of heart. And then it was very important for the ANC to pretend that they had conceded to the arguments of the smaller parties, not caved into the DA's court case. And the ANC is misleading the public into pretending that it had an open mind on the VAT increase all along, when in his own papers, the minister said he was going ahead, it was impossible to do anything else but have the VAT increase, and the smaller parties were never justified to believe that he would withdraw the VAT increase. And now suddenly he has a different tune.
Why did he say that, Mdu? If the finance minister knew, as you say, that there's a possibility that the VAT hike may be scrapped, why did he say in court that we've never said that we were going to change the VAT hike?
Clement, the process were running concurrently. The discussion with the ministry and the Department of the National Treasury, with ourselves as the ANC and other political parties, was evolving at the same time as the minister has got to deal with the court papers. So there was no way that when the minister has got to defend a court case, he is going to say in court, I don't believe that my decision is incorrect, unless in the course of the interaction between him, his department and these parties who are involved in the back-to-back conversation, he comes to a realization that actually there is a different way in which this matter can be handled, and these proposals are making sense. But I was also expecting you to ask Helen, maybe I should ask because I'm also in this conversation. Sure, she may not be comfortable to share what the minister's lawyers have written to them as an offer for an out-of-court settlement, but perfectly, I'm quite certain that the DA on his own, for his credibility on this matter, they should be at liberty to share with the public. This is how we responded to the minister's request, and therefore there's a discussion about an out-of-court settlement. I'm making this statement because the minister would have recognized that process in the public communication. What we stand with now, me and you and the South Africans, is what the minister said, and he has written it down on behalf of the department. How then are we going to be persuaded by a private conversation?
Have you spoken to your own minister and asked if this is really the case?
Which one? About
Minister of Finance, and say, are you asking for a out-of-court settlement with the DA?
Well, when this thing was went out about the DA, because the DA issued a statement, and we knew that the DA was going to react because this is naturally going to be embarrassing for them.
Yeah, but have you asked him? Have you said to him?
I'm coming to that point. So when that came, we sent it to I sent that to Enoch. You know he's overseas, to say to him, now we are being told that there is another, this is a statement of the DA. And his response to me is that I don't know what is this about.
I mean, that's bizarre, Helen. Are you guys prepared? Are you guys prepared to at least demonstrate to the public that there is a conversation ongoing and this is just not smoke and mirrors?
Now, of course, this is smoke and mirrors on behalf of the ANC, because when the ANC realized they weren't going to win this court case, they quickly were prepared to offer us a settlement out of court, but at the same time, they wanted to pretend that the smaller parties had persuaded them. So they offered us an out-of-court settlement, but they didn't want us to talk about that publicly, obviously, because they wanted to have this joint press conference with the smaller parties today and say, we've listened to them and we're going to change our position. So they didn't like it when we put out a statement and said that the minister's lawyers have approached us for a settlement. And they certainly didn't like it when we pointed out that in his court papers last Thursday and on Tuesday, the minister said that there was never any agreement at all to withdraw VAT and that there was no alternative to the VAT increase. So what the ANC was trying to do was to end the court case on the one hand, pretend that they had conceded in the negotiations with the smaller parties on the other hand, and make us shut up about the fact that they didn't have a case. And of course, we aren't obliged to keep quiet. We put the facts on the table.
But Helen, how do I know that what you are saying is true? Like the public watching us now, to Mdu's point, I mean, if the finance minister tells his own comrades, I know nothing about that, I mean, that creates confusion about whether or not as the DA you're really having this conversation with the lawyer. So how do we know that in fact there's a conversation going on? How do you prove that?
Well, the lawyers for the minister must come out and say they never offered us a settlement. Because in fact they did. Now, as Mdu says, the minister is overseas. And this is the problem with the ANC. The left hand never knows what the right hand is doing. And the lawyers for the Treasury and the minister came back to us yesterday and said, we'd like to offer you an out-of-court settlement, that we'd like to make an order of court. We went back to them with a counter-offer to say we still want to continue with part 2 of our application to have section 7.4 of the VAT Act declared unconstitutional, and we want you to tender our costs.
Is that all
That's
an email?
What we went back to them with. That's what the discussion between our lawyers.
On email.
Our lawyers, Advocate Bishop and Mindy Shapiro and Smith. They were negotiating with the minister's lawyers, the Treasury's lawyers. And that is what's going on. If somebody else in the Treasury mandated the lawyers to do that and didn't tell the minister, I can't help that. But that is what we are used to with the ANC. For example, when there was that agreement on Bella at NEDLAC, when the president had agreed to the resolution that was reached in NEDLAC, and the deputy director of the presidency had in fact signed that agreement, the president claimed he knew nothing about it.
Okay.
Now, it is a typical thing, and we never know what to believe from the ANC, but what we know is that we had an approach from their lawyers, and the lawyers must know that they have not got a strong case in court, and they would prefer for the minister to settle rather than be humiliated by the outcome of the court case.
Where does this leave the GNU? I mean, there have been many challenges, particularly between you as the ANC and the DA in this GNU. The president had already said the DA has defined itself outside of the GNU by also approaching the courts. So where does this leave you? Today you held a briefing with all the other parties except the DA, which is part of the Government of National Unity.
Let me deal with the first issue first, just for a minute. Helen seems to be conflating the ANC with the state. Minister Godongwane has taken the matter that he's defending in court on behalf of the democratic state, not the African National Congress. The ANC is not in court. I want to clear that. The second issue I want to clear is that, so the confusion therefore cannot arise and be justified that in the ANC you end up not knowing who exactly you should talk to and what is right and wrong at a given point in time. Coming to your question, the DA has in many respects defined itself outside the Government of National Unity in the following manner. The cabinet, Clement, the cabinet in this country, in terms of the law and by the policies and procedure of how government works, takes a decision that is binding to cabinet members. If you go out and you challenge a cabinet decision, you are defining yourselves outside the cabinet. It's unheard of. The DA, rather than coming to a conversation with the ANC, even post the fiscal framework adoption, because when Parliament accepted that the fiscal framework is adopted on condition that there will be 30-day period for the discussion on this matter, that was open to all of us, including the DA. But because the DA was not genuinely about the VAT, the DA knew that the VAT can be reversed before the 1st of May without going to court. It knew on the process that the ANC and other parties have agreed must be followed and adopted by Parliament. But the reason why they decided to rush to court to interdict the implementation of the VAT was because they were not willing to subject themselves into a process that was supposed to be followed by all parties in Parliament, and therefore decided to result in what I said is an offensive campaign anchored on lies, that the ANC is lying that there will be a way in which you can reverse the VAT before the 1st of May. So